Everybody, thank you for joining us here today. We've got 45 action-packed minutes coming up. I thank you for joining our webinar called 6 eAuction Myths Holding Your Team Back, Busted in 45 Minutes. So start with myself. Thank you for joining me here today. My name is John Powell, and I am the VP of Operations and Sales at Auctionize, an e-auction sourcing solution. I've been in the e-sourcing world I've been doing e-auctions for just over 7 years, and I've been in procurement for a little over 15 years. So once again, I'm at Auctionize now. Before that, I worked for a company called Scan Market, also an e-auction software provider that was acquired by Unit4 a few years ago, which is why I'm here now. So that's me. I appreciate you joining me here today. Let's finish up intros. I'm going to kick the intro over to James Meads.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks, John, and pleasure to be with you. My name is James Meads. I'm a procurement professional by background, and now I have my own business called EntProc, which is short for Entrepreneurial Procurement, because my deep conviction is that procurement as a function needs to become a lot more entrepreneurial to survive the AI age. I've done both direct and indirect procurement throughout my career. I started out in the UK in the automotive industry, and then spent most of my professional career in Germany in both the automotive and the consumer goods sectors. And then I left the corporate world in 2018 to do a little bit of freelance consulting before I then set up my own business. I advise procurement technology companies, as well as helping procurement leaders to select the right procurement tech for their specific needs based on industry sector, maturity, geography, that type of thing. So Janice, over to you. That's me.
All right, sounds good. I'm Janice Marquardt, and I own Passwell Solutions, where I help people implement e-auction programs and bring negotiation back into their supply chain and procurement functions. I also wrote a book on e-auctions that came out in May. It is called Transform Procurement, The Value of E-Auctions. It's available on Amazon, so you can get a physical copy or a Kindle copy if you like that. It's a quick read. It's not very long. It's a plane ride. So it's just intended to kind of get people started on auctions, answer basic questions. And so that's a lot of what I do. One of my main clients has a roughly $7 billion supply chain. They put $1.3 billion through auction in their first year and got $40 million in value out of it. So it works. It's a great tool, but it's got to be done right, which is why we're here today. All right. So, John, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, absolutely.
We have a lot of myths.
Yeah, we got 6 myths we're going to debunk here today. And before we do, I will just say Janice's book, if you're on the procurement event circuit this year, I do give away copies. So I'll be at DPW, and I'll be at SIG and a few other events. So happy to give away a copy. So let's get to the material. Our very first myth that we're going to debunk is going to be debunked by James, and it is that e-auctions are only for materials. James, take it away.
Yeah, so I'm a convert on this one, because I would have said the exact same things back in my early practitioner days. And let's be honest, it's certainly, I would say, easier to run an e-auction if you're running it for direct materials, especially if it's some kind of direct material or purchase component that's to a very specific engineering norm, because then kind of the qualitative aspect is kind of defined then by the engineering norm or by the specification, which then ultimately means that the auction is much more focused on things like price and lead time. So I think it's definitely easier to run it for direct spend, but it's by no means impossible to have a successful e-auction for indirect spend or for other, or even for services. I know, Janice, you've got an example that we're going to get to later for services that you had specific success with running e-auctions. So I did my first e-auction back in 2003, back in the good old days when the software was still pretty clunky, but e-auctions were definitely a thing, especially in low margin industries like automotive, which is where I cut my teeth and where my first role was as a buyer. So I worked for Jaguar Land Rover in the automotive industry back then, and the first auction that I ran was indeed for purchase components. It was for stampings and press work on one of the new vehicle models that we were sourcing back then. Fast forward about 14 years from then, and I found myself in a new role within the consumer goods space, where I'd just taken over a role being responsible for logistics and transportation spend in sub-Saharan Africa. So we've got both an indirect category and we've got an area of the globe that technologically the supply base was not particularly mature. And we decided to run an e-sourcing, an e-auction event for ground transportation. And I think that there were some critical success factors that enabled me to succeed there. I think the biggest one, far and away the biggest one, was to have alignment among my internal stakeholders within the business. So they'd been given a target that they thought was going to be very, very challenging for the following year. And they came to me and said, James, empty your pockets. What have you got? So that was certainly one aspect, that they were very open and very willing to engage with procurement because they saw me as someone that was experienced coming into the role that could help them to achieve their targets. So it wasn't a hostile relationship between me as the buyer and them as the business partner or as the stakeholders. So that was definitely number one. Number two, and we did face a little bit of headwind here in the piece of software that we used. I won't name them, but they're one of the legacy e-sourcing providers from a very famous publicly listed German software company. I think you probably guessed who they are. For anyone that's used that software, you will know and you will empathize with me that it's not a particularly easy piece of software to use, especially for the suppliers when it comes to getting them registered and getting them onboarded. So I committed to the suppliers that they could reach out to me, and I gave them my direct number that they could reach out and call, email, book a video call with me at any time if they were struggling to get registered on the system. So that took away, especially for some of the ones, let's bear in mind, these were transport companies. There were some big international ones, the Schenkers and the DHLs of the world, but we also had some pretty local suppliers in South Africa that were not that technologically advanced. Some of them, this was what, 2017, were still using Yahoo and Hotmail email addresses for business. So I committed to them that we were going to help them get registered. The third thing that I did, which I think helped to build trust, was that I got all of those suppliers into a conference room at Kimberly-Clark's headquarters in Johannesburg, and unfortunately I had to join by video conference because of limits on travel spend. I could only fly over once to do the post-tender negotiations, but the head of supply chain for South Africa and the shipping controller and the head of warehousing were all there in the room with them. I joined by video conference, and we had everyone in there together at the same time, just to prove that we weren't doing any favors for our incumbent vendors, or there was no, under the table deal being done, and that everyone had equal access to us as a team, and that any questions that anyone put on the table would be minuted and distributed to the whole team that were joining. And then when we ran the tender, we just made it very, very clear what the rules and what the requirements were, and we were very transparent in the way that we were going to run it, how much time people had. We made it very clear that we weren't going to have any negotiations on price beyond just clarification of the bids, and that we would shortlist 3 or 4 suppliers to take forward into final negotiations after we'd done what was essentially round 1 as an e-auction. So that's just one very practical example that I can give you, but I can definitely say if you do it right, e-auctions are definitely not just for direct materials, albeit with that being said, if you have a commodity that's to a very clear engineering specification, it does definitely make it a lot easier to set up and run them. Okay, so the next myth that we have is that eAuctions ignore quality and non-price factors. Janice, I think you're going to take that one.
Nope,
It's actually
John.
me. It's
Oh,
for
sorry.
me. But thank you, James. I appreciate it. So yeah, e-auctions ignore quality and non-price factors. I'm going to try to debunk that myth in 5 minutes. So yeah, once again, John Powell here with Auctionize. One of the myths that we still hear in 2026 is that e-auctions are just about driving price down, and they completely ignore service levels, delivery, payment terms, all the non-price stuff that actually matters. Does that sound familiar to you? Yeah, I've sat in countless meetings where procurement leaders will say, we can't use e-auctions for anything complex. We'll end up with, the cheapest supplier. They can't deliver on time. They won't meet our quality standards, and they won't support us long term. Here's the reality. That fear comes from outdated thinking, or from seeing poorly designed e-auctions from 10 or maybe 15 years ago. Modern e-auctions are not blind price only races. They're not a race to the bottom. They're built to protect and even prioritize the exact non-price factors your organization cares about the most. So, with any e-auction, there's the strategy and the platform, and both are critically important. You could have, the best platform in the world, and if you've got a poor strategy, it's just not going to work. So let's think of it this way. I like bananas and I like apples, right? And if I go to the store one day and bananas are $1 and apples are $1, 10 out of 10 times I'm going to buy bananas. Well, what if next week bananas were now $1.10 and apples were 90 cents? I may still go with bananas, but I'm going to have to start thinking about it. My point is, there is a point of demarcation, if you will, where I will decide I am no longer going to buy bananas, and I'm going to go with, instead of bananas, I'm going to go with apples. And that might be it. Hey, look, bananas are $2 and they're giving away apples for a dime, or it might be somewhere in between. But I'm going to give you a real life example here that applies that logic. So a few years ago, I had a client that would engage a couple of the big four consulting firms, and I always get this mixed up, so I just flip it. But he would use Deloitte and he would use PwC, and I always forget which one he liked better. But for our example here, he preferred Deloitte over PwC. And what he would do is he would run an e-auction between the two, but he would put in a bid handicapped on PwC. Once again, it might have been Deloitte, I forget. But anyways, he would put in an 8% bid handicap, and he would actually make it visible to both suppliers when they bid. So when he ran his e-auction, PwC knew that they had to be at least 8% better than Deloitte to earn that business. And that's that line of demarcation between apples and bananas I was talking about. Now, that's a setting to let them see. I'm not going to deep dive into that at all. That's just simply an auction setting where, transparency and visibility. But that's what he actually did. So let me give you one more quick real world example. I also worked with a global healthcare organization that used e-auctions for clinical lab services, not just commodities, really highly technical, quality sensitive category. And what they did is they weighted their auction. They based the winner only 40% on the price. Another 30% was based on the quality and compliance scores. And this was all done in pre-qualification, mind you, not during the e-auction. But they put another 20% weight on on-time delivery history. And last but not least, 10% is on sustainability and service support. So what was their result? They didn't just get a lower price. They ended up with a supplier who ended up outperforming their incumbent on every single non-price metric, which they truly cared about. The new supplier actually won the auction, and they had the opportunity because they could compete on total value, not just on price. So the myth that e-auctions ignore quality, it only holds true if you let it. When you design them correctly, with the proper pre-qualifications, weighted scoring, mandatory gates or transparency or non-price criteria, e-auctions become one of the most powerful ways to protect quality and force suppliers to compete on the full picture of value. That's why this myth is still alive. People will remember the bad old auctions, not the way they're run today. So if you've ever been told e-auctions kill quality, that myth is now debunked. So now I'm going to turn it over to Janet to debunk myth number 3, which is e-auctions damage supplier relationships.
Yeah, this one's a fun one because I've definitely heard it over and over again that suppliers hate them, that they won't participate in them. And there are certainly suppliers out there, and I will, to protect the innocent or not so innocent, not name names, but there are certainly suppliers that refuse to join e-auctions. I will say that sometimes there's suppliers that I'm trying to find ways to get value out of them anyway. I'll just put it that way. But I will say that I have seen the reverse happen. And I've seen the reverse happen for a couple of reasons and in a couple of ways. One is you actually don't skip the RFP when you run most auctions. We used to do that. We used to go straight from we need the thing to we're going to auction the thing, right? And we skipped an RFP or an RFI or even an RFQ, right? We skipped that whole process. And there was this idea that, oh, they're fast and they're quick. And that was why we pretty much only did materials. And that was why they became a race to the bottom, right? I'm a strong believer in running an RFP ahead of your auction. Your auction is simply a negotiation tool. That's it. That's all it is. It is nothing more, but it's also nothing less. And it's a really nice, fair, transparent, clear way to do that. So supplier relationships are really about how do you treat them in the pre-qualification? How do you treat them in the RFP? How do you treat them in your sustained relationship when you have a contract, right? The RFP is always a teeny tiny piece of your sourcing. And what really happens is, how does that supplier relationship work in the long run? Not in the 10 minutes of an auction. If your supplier relationship can get damaged that badly in a 10-minute or 20-minute auction, it's probably pretty fragile to start with. So that's not where we build supplier relationships. And anybody who's a procurement professional knows that's just not where we do it. We do it in all of the other activities we do with our key suppliers. So I'm going to say that's a big piece of it. The other thing is that auctions give suppliers 3 things when done right. One is transparency. They get information about where they are in a market. They get information about, their rank, or they get information about where the lead bid is. All of that is up to you as to how you strategize it, and that's not a word, how you put it together and how you present that information to suppliers. But the question is, how much transparency do you want to give them? I always try very hard to give as much transparency to my suppliers as I possibly can, other than lead bid. I don't tend to show lead bid because they're real sensitive about confidentiality and keeping their own price secret, and that's true of all their competitors as well. So I don't tell them who else is in the auction. I don't tell them how many suppliers are in the auction, but I do try to tell them, where are you in the market? Where is that market, etc. Right? So transparency. Second is speed. At the end of the auction, they know if the business is probably theirs, right? If you've set it up correctly at the end of that auction, when you're on that hammer down moment, you have somebody who's bid rank 1, bid rank 2, and they know what that means, right? And it can mean different things. It doesn't necessarily mean bid rank 2 gets no business. Sometimes it means bid rank 2 gets 30% of the business and bid rank 1 gets 70%. And you can be real clear with that, right? So they know immediately, and they can start actually putting together their team to deliver what you need. They can start ordering inventory. They can start getting raw materials, right? They know that business is there, so they can start putting their ducks in a row. So when you say go, they're like, yep, we're ready. So that's speed. And then the third one is clarity. I've never seen anything like auctions for building better scopes of work. And I've talked to multiple suppliers about this who have said, Janice, I know you run auctions. I know you run auction programs. I know you put them in place. I hate them. And I've said, once we started doing auctions, didn't you start getting better scopes of work? Oh, yeah, actually I did. Okay, I thought so. So that I've had multiple suppliers saying, actually, yeah, Janice, you're right. We did get better scopes of work out of you once we started running auctions. So transparency, speed, clarity. Those are the benefits to suppliers, and those are the things that actually build relationships with your suppliers inside or outside an auction. Always is transparency, speed, and clarity. So all of that said, I have also heard, John, that sometimes eAuction software is hard to use. We've talked about that a little bit. You want to talk about that?
Absolutely. Thanks, Janice. I appreciate it. Yeah, hello again, everybody. John Powell here with Auctionize. So yeah, myth number 4 is one that we hear it all the time in 2026. It's e-auction software is hard. It's too complicated. It takes forever to learn, and it isn't worth the hassle. I get it. A lot of people have memories of clunky tools from 10 or 15 years ago, or they've seen demos that felt like learning a whole new ERP system just to run a single event. They think I already have a full-time job. I don't have time to become a software expert just to save a little bit of money. So, modern e-auction software, it was built for sourcing professionals, and it's not complicated. But, at this point, I want to jump in and say, look, I work for Auctionize, okay? I sell software. So what do you expect me to say? I'm not going to sit here and say it's clunky or what have you, or, that's not my point. And the probably more important point is I am in the software each and every single day, and I run demos, a couple times a week, if not more. So yeah, to me, it's not complicated at all. I think it's super easy. But I guess my point is, e-auction software, it is easy until it isn't. So let's think back to, I just mentioned, demos. How do you typically buy software, right? Whether it's e-auction software or anything, you're gonna do a demo of the software, probably multiple demos. And have you ever had a demo where maybe it was clunky, or the software stalled, or it led you to a place that the solutions consultant didn't want to go? My guess is you probably haven't. Typically solutions consultants, and I'm one myself, they know their software, but more importantly, they, and forgive the term, but they know where the bodies lie with their software. They know what to avoid. And I when I saw a few registrations come through, I'm like, uh-oh, I see some people that I've done demos for, and I'm giving away the secret. But I don't apologize. It's human nature. You're going to show the strengths of your system, and you're going to avoid the weaknesses. So, once again, when you buy technology, you think about how you do it. You go through all those demos, but eventually you land on a winner, right? You pick the software you're going to go with. There's an implementation afterwards, and then there's some sort of training. And also keep in mind, there's a wide spectrum of e-auction software. I typically trend more towards people that are not currently running e-auctions or have never run an e-auction, and really just need a basic functionality. We need a good scope of work and 3 or 4 suppliers, and we can make it work. But you can spend easily 6 figures on e-auction software, and I've even heard one story where someone spent 7 figures on e-auction software. So, the bells and whistles, the more you spend, the more you're going to get. But a basic system, you don't really need all that. My point is, you've bought a system, you've implemented it, you've gone through a training, right? And as Janice has alluded to earlier, you want to go into your first e-auction, you want to have information, you want to have a good scope, you want to have some pricing information. Well, that stuff takes time. And if you just bought the software, most likely you're not going to run your first event for a month or 2 months or maybe even 6 months. And why would an initiative fail for e-auctions? It's because your stakeholders don't use it. It's human nature. If you try something and it doesn't work, or it's clunky, or whatever, people tend to give it one try and not go back. So the point I'm trying to get across is, yes, the software is easy to use. It's way more intuitive. It's designed more for modern day supply chains than it ever was. And if you're running multiple e-auctions per month, yeah, it is. It's super easy. It's intuitive, and you copy from old events, and it's super easy. But the point is the support. When you do have a problem, you're running that first e-auction and you hit a stopping point for whatever reason. Maybe it's a setting, maybe it's permissions, could be anything. What happens? Do you log a ticket and someone gets back to you in a day, a week, a month? Who knows? Or do they have a customer forum where you put your pain point in there and hopefully somebody else has it? Who knows, right? Is there a human in the loop? And probably more importantly, is that human based in the same time zone? What you want is real-time support from somebody that's can give it in a timely manner, and that's how you keep your company's, what's important to your company, their priorities is having somebody that's a human in the loop that can set this auction up correctly. AI can only do so much in message and forum boards. So the system is only as good as the support that comes with it. So once again, e-auction software is not hard. It is easy to use. I'm one of the least techie people. If you couldn't see me, flipping through the slides here and struggling with it, I am not techie. but I can, I am very good at eAuction software. So that's my 5 minutes. I hope it helped. I am now going to turn it back in over to Janice, who is going to debunk myth number 5, which is that eAuctions tend to scare off your incumbents. Janice?
Yeah, so this one's a fun one, right? You've got really good relationship with your suppliers. Maybe you have some strategic partners. And I would say there are probably a few strategic partners that are truly strategic partners. But something that Katie McEwen, which if you follow her on LinkedIn, she's great. She posted a little while ago, she posted the quote, which is anonymous, from somebody that said, supplier resilience comes from mutual dependency. Vendor relationships are often just Stockholm syndrome. So I think that's really interesting because that one really made me pause because I think there are a lot of our strategic suppliers that really are just holding us captive. And sometimes it's really hard to figure out whether that supplier is giving us true value or not. And kind of back to where we started, where John and James were talking about total cost of ownership and total value and really setting up your auction that way. If your incumbent is not giving you the best value, they're probably not a great partner. And I hate to say that because it's kind of like breaking up with, a significant other when you've got a really good supplier that turns out is really not doing well for you. But it can really highlight to them where they're not doing well. And maybe that isn't where you start with your auction program, right? You start with the stuff that you care a little less about. You start with your tail spend. You start consolidating some of that stuff at the bottom of the barrel that you can use to kind of figure out how auctions work. No, it's not the high value stuff, but it's really where you can refine your processes and how you as a company want to do auctions and how you as a company want to use them as a negotiation tool. But I will say, kind of back to that idea of that fragile supplier relationship, right? Like if the minute you say auction, your main strategic partner supplier says, oh, I'm out, bye, they're really probably not actually your partner. So I hate to be the truth teller here, but they might not really be thinking about you as a company as their customer quite the way that you expected them to. Now, there's always conversations that can be had. There might be reasons you really sit them down and say, hey, this is why we're approaching this. We are facing a very tough time as a business. And if we can't cut costs and if we can't find savings, we're not going to keep being your customer because we're not going to be here, right? That being said, we also don't want to drive our suppliers out of business. Supplier says, I got to make a certain margin in order to be your supplier. Here are the things I offer you as value that I think you value that make me a good supplier partner to you, right? Auctions sometimes kind of spur that conversation in a more honest and real way than you ever expected them to. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. So the other one is that if you have an incumbent that has a huge part of your work, you don't have a very resilient supply chain, one. And two, you're going to scare off other suppliers. I had a client very recently actually award a huge chunk of their work to one supplier. The entire industry knows it, right? So that entire supplier industry is a fairly close-knit industry, as many of them are. They all know that a large chunk of their work has just gone to their competitor. They're all freaking out a little bit, but they no longer get a shot at that business, whereas they were getting auctions for that business. And previously, before they started doing auctions, this client was just doing the 3 bids and a buy. So their project manager would send out 3 bids, right? And then they'd select their favorite, whether that was low or not, and then they would award it. Meanwhile, 8 suppliers were qualified for the work. Those other 5 never saw it. So it's interesting because I once had a client start a auction program, and then this one set of suppliers just complained, just bloody murder. It was the worst thing that ever happened to them, this auction program. It's horrible. Okay, and so finally, after like a year and a half of doing auctions, this client stopped doing auctions. Supplier said, wait, where are my auctions? And they said, well, you hated them. They said, well, but we're so far, now we're not getting any offers of business. Well, because you've gone back to letting the project managers just send it to their favorite and get a quote. So suddenly all 8 suppliers noticed a noticeable drop in the amount of business that they were getting an offer to or being able to bid on. So Auctions can really keep your incumbents competitive. They can keep them alive, and they can build some of that resilience into things. Even if you're just auctioning 20% of your business, you're keeping that second supplier alive, competitive, and thoughtful. So with all of that, James, I have also heard auctions add too much time. They add so much time. What do you think about that, James?
Well, thanks, Janice. They can do, yeah, but I mean, I think you and John have already touched on a couple of points that are kind of related to this in myth number 3 and myth number 4. So you touched on it about damaging supplier relationships. In that myth, you were talking about specifications and the fact that generally when you run eAuctions, or even when you just run a more structured e-sourcing event, if it's an ERFP, it doesn't necessarily have to be an eAuction, you generally are going to give the supplier a better spec when you do that, simply because you have to succinctly state what it is that you actually want to buy and make it relatively easy to understand for everyone that's participating, not just suppliers that you've involved in the past or that are among your existing supply base. So there is an inevitability of being a little bit more upfront work when you're going to do an e-auction, rather than just firing out an email to all of your incumbent vendors or approved vendor list and asking them to supply a quote. That's life. If you're going to do a more structured, more professional tender, whether you do it online or offline, that's going to be a little bit more time that's going to have to be done upfront. A little bit like if you use AI to do a repetitive task. The first time that you set up the AI to be able to train it how to do it, it's going to take you a little bit longer. The second time, it will take you a bit less. The third time, fourth time, fifth time, it will get progressively less and less time each time, because number one, you've already got the information in the AI to be able to train it to do what you want to get out of it. And just you're working that muscle and you're getting better. 10,000 hours and you become a master at anything is the famous phrase, right? So the more time you spend on doing any task, the better and faster that you will get at doing it. So I do acknowledge that there is a little bit of front-loaded work to be able to put together an e-auction or even an e-sourcing event. With that being said, the time from actually running the event to selection to contract should be, if you've set it up right, much, much shorter. So overall, even though it might not feel like it at the start when you're setting it up, overall, by running an e-auction or even by running an e-sourcing event, the cycle time should be shorter than if you do it manually. So that's number one. John, you were talking about how about debunking the myth of the software being hard to use. I think, and you didn't actually say during your answer, but Auctionize, for those of you that don't know, actually have managed service arm as well. So they can actually do e-sourcing or e-auctions as a service and set that up on the back end. They have a team based in Bulgaria, and you're getting very high quality labor in Eastern Europe to be able to run that at much less cost than you would have running that in North America if you engaged an outsourcing consulting partner. But anyhow, this isn't the sales pitch. What I wanted to say is around the software. So even if you're stuck with a legacy source to pay, source to contract suite that has a horrible e-auction module in there, and that's putting you or your team off from running e-auctions because you think it's just going to add time just from your perspective to set it up, but also because you're going to have to handhold the suppliers to get them through because the software is so horrible to use, I would honestly take a step back and just have a look in the market for tools like Auctionize and other competitors that are out there that have broadly similar products, and just you will be very, very surprised at how competitive the software is now to do specialist e-auctions or e-sourcing events, and just how much better it is from some of the legacy end-to-end suites that are out there on the market that, let's be honest, don't have particularly great sourcing modules. So if your incumbent software stack is putting you off doing it because you think it's just going to add time and administration, I would strongly encourage you to do a little bit of due diligence on what other providers are out there and what they cost, because I genuinely think you will be pleasantly surprised at A, how good the software is and how user-friendly it is, which is ultimately going to reduce the cycle time of running the event, but also just how affordable it is. And it's not my place to discuss pricing of auction eyes. John, if you want to say a few words at the end, more than happy to. But you can go out and get a good e-sourcing solution for much less than you think. And we're talking low 5 figures, not 6 figures.
Yeah, thank you, James. I appreciate you saying that, and I never like to be salesy, and I'm not going to be now, but I appreciate that. Yeah, we're a great, we've got a very, what we call a low barrier to entry. In fact, you can even try before you buy with Auctionize. So it's a lot less than you think, and ROI is you'll make your money back after a single event typically. Even with the larger, more expensive suites. But you'll make your money. I've got a 26x ROI win under my belt in a little over a year here in Auctionize. So yeah, very low barrier to entry. I don't want to spend a ton of time on that here, but happy to talk to anybody on here about that. So James, have you debunked your myth? Are we ready to go to Q&A?
Yeah, I'm done, John. Yeah, over to you. Open to Q&A. Yeah, let's get these
awesome.
Let's get these questions up.
Okay. Well, let's do this. I am looking in queue. So please, right now, we've got about 8 minutes here. And I've got 2 questions in queue, but we should have time to do more than 2. So I'm going to start with the first one. And I'm going to guess that this is for Janice, but anybody can jump in, I guess. So the first question is, what is your favorite category to auction?
Yeah, I love this question because my answer surprises people. One of my favorite things to auction is an IT implementation. So you've got a new software, you've decided to implement it, you're getting an implementation partner. So we're talking about, or Infosys, Accenture, right, that world. Now, the hard part of this one is you definitely have to run an RFP ahead of time. And then you definitely have to spend some time truing up your suppliers, right? So they've got 2 different timeline implementations, right? They've got different bells and whistles. They've got different resource plans. So you have to spend some time with that category to get them either trued up or figure out what you want to do that bid transformation with, like John's apples and bananas, as far as how much you want to put your finger on the scale of one provider versus another, because you can do that. But I will say I have seen reductions of 20, 30% on those auctions because once you're down to price and you've gotten all of the other stuff figured out, all your other value add, you've figured out what your bid transformation should be, total cost of ownership, et cetera. Once you're down to price, those tend to be very hungry suppliers, and they also tend to be very high margin suppliers. So really there's a lot of squeeze in that orange. So those are my favorite ones. I love watching those and I love setting those up. Someday I have a dream to run the very 2 large ERP companies against each other in a multi-million, possibly billion-dollar auction because somebody wants to put in a new ERP system and they're going to go with one of the big guys. I have a dream. It's on my bucket list. I'm going to run that auction someday. So if you want to run that auction, I have ideas, let me know because I will help you. So.
Thanks, Janice. I appreciate it. There's another question in queue. It's not directed to anybody in particular, but I'll take it unless somebody else wants it. Somebody asked, I'm hearing lots of success stories here. Can you share a real life story of an e-auction that maybe didn't work and why? And I do have one. So as I mentioned earlier, I typically work with people that have not run e-auctions previously. We're a great place to start. You typically wouldn't go from, somebody else to us. We're a good place to start. And I'm going to share a failure. They were building a building. They needed a construction of a building, and they ran the e-auction the same time as they really ran the RFI. So they gathered, some of the scope of work at the same time as they gathered prices. And what they found was, they had five different builders that were between 3 million and 3.25, which is great. But there was another one, kind of an outlier, that was at about $2.5 million. Okay. And what happened was they ran it as an e-auction. So, if you've ever run an e-auction before, what makes people bid. It's that fear of missing out. It's, when you put that, bid in there and it's yellow, you're close to first place. Or, if you do it and there's a ranking and you're second, that's what encourages them to bid further. So what happened was, all these bids came in, and there were 4 or 5, maybe even 6 different builders that were all within, 4 and 6% of each other. But this one outlier made them all show up in either yellow. Actually, they were all in red. So they submitted one bid, nothing else happened. They came to find out that, once they chose this supplier at $2.5 million, they couldn't start construction for over 9 months. And that was just not acceptable. They had a business plan, and they just, they learned the hard way to get a really good scope of work. Now, the happy ending is, I wish they had done it differently, and I'm sure they will in the future, but they ended up, eliminating that supplier because they just couldn't work with him or her. And they took those other 4 or 5, and they ran a successful auction. And they ended up getting that price fairly quickly down just under $3 million. So, do the math. It's, probably 9, 10, 11% savings. But, sometimes you can turn your failures into success. And in this case, they did. So thought that was a cool story for somebody that had run eAuctions that had never run them previously.
Yeah, I've seen it happen multiple times where you have to go to like number 2, right? And so it's nice to run an auction that way. If you think you're going to need that, there's different formats and different strategies you can follow to get there. But it's nice to have a number 2 and have it be really clear and have them know they were number 2. But number 1 falls through, you go to number 2 and say, hey, you were second place in the auction and our first place fell through. They couldn't meet our cyber requirements. They couldn't meet, the scope. They had a crazy timeline that they didn't tell us about or they lied about, right? And that's back to that whole auctions can be more than price because you have a number 2 to go to, whereas without it, you don't necessarily have one. John, there was a question in the Q&A. First impressions seem to be so important when it comes to auctions. Many people are super dismissive after a messy experience in the past. What's your advice when it comes to building that confidence back? Got thoughts on that one? Or James, you got thoughts on that one?
Sorry, Janice, say it again. Happy to have a stab at it. Yeah.
Rebuilding confidence when you've had a messy auction experience. Thoughts on kind of how to reapproach it?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think it goes back again to just put the odds in your favor that you're not going to have a negative experience by doing your due diligence first. And I think going back to the previous question around when eAuctions have failed, every time when I had eAuctions that didn't work, it was usually because we'd not spent enough time doing due diligence ahead. We'd not done an RFI, or we'd not really scoped out the market good enough to make sure that we were going to have a successful auction. So I think it's kind of a roundabout answer to it, but I would just try and minimize that happening, but by doing as much possible work up front that you can, just to verify that the suppliers that you're inviting are capable of supplying what it is you want them to supply, and that you've got enough background on them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I always tell people to think of auctions as that phone call we used to make about hey, can you sharpen your pencil, right? And then you call the other supplier, hey, can you sharpen your pencil? We don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. Suppliers don't have time for that if they even answer their phone, right? None of us have time for that anymore. That's what procurement used to be. Yeah. And now, and also we don't have time or money. Somebody mentioned travel budget earlier, right? You don't have the travel budget necessarily to fly to those suppliers. They may not have this travel budget to fly to you. So I always think of auctions as a negotiation tool, and they're one of the many options in the toolbox. The question is not auction or don't auction. It's negotiate or don't negotiate your pricing, and then what's the right tool. And auctions are often the right tool, but not always. Some negotiations are better done in person, sitting across a conference table from somebody. So,
Janice, we are coming up to we are at our time at 12:40. I'm going to ask for another minute, people. I promise we'll be done here in just a minute. I just saw the question. First of all, we will be sharing this recording afterwards. I encourage you to share. This is not proprietary information. We want you to share it freely and widely. And Candace had asked the question, who I met Candace at SIG last year, so somebody I respect very much. I do believe, yes, you were talking about the seller. I'll just make a quick comment. Seller conditioning is part of, it's critical. It's something I do. If you're running an eAuction for the first time, what I will do is the day before that auction, I will condition that seller. When I say condition, that means I'm going to set up a copy of that auction the day before, so that the first time that supplier is going in there is not the first time they're seeing the tool or using red, yellow, and green. I'll give them 30 minutes. Typically, it doesn't take 30 minutes, and maybe they've used the tool a million times, but it's something that I offer, and most good e-auction providers will do it. So that's very critical. Yes, it's a tool. If there's no support, if the supplier doesn't know how to bid or know what red, yellow, or green means, you want to know that ahead of time, and you don't want their first time using eAuction software to be in a 42-minute eAuction. So yes, Candace, happy to talk more about it afterwards, and thanks for bringing that up. So I want to thank our other presenters. I know we gave you a lot of material here today. We had a lot to cover. I appreciate everybody joining. Like I said, we will send out a recording afterwards. It's certainly available. Hopefully, if you have interest in talking to any of us, you know how to get a hold of us. I've sent you all an email personally. Janice is not hard to find, nor is James. So I do want to thank you all for your time. We're 2 minutes over, so I'm going to wrap it up here, but hope you enjoyed the presentation. Hope you enjoyed the comments. And we look forward to talking to you hopefully again here real soon in the future. So I'll leave the mic open for a few minutes so James and Janice can say goodbye as well.
Pleasure to be with you, John, and thanks again for inviting me. And I would just again encourage you, go out, have a look what's on the market, especially now with AI being able to write scopes and being able to evaluate responses as well as running eAuctions, and just educate yourself about the software that's on the market if you still think that eAuction software is clunky. That would be my biggest tip.
Yeah, and I'll put in a plug. I do run a newsletter every Tuesday. I also post those articles on LinkedIn. Variety of topics across supply chain, not just eAuctions, sometimes leadership. Sometimes I talk about my Christmas tree right around Christmas time. So I'm not gonna lie, I really do. But if you go to my website, passwellsolutions.com, under articles, you can subscribe to my newsletter. That's the only thing I will send you, I promise, is an email with a link to my newsletter article and a little bit of it at the beginning. So if that's of value to you or your team, please feel free to sign up.
Thank you, everybody. Once again, that concludes our webinar. Janice, thank you. James, thank you. Everyone that joined, thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Take care now.